Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to XJW Diaries. My name is Justin. I got something a little bit different for you guys today. I hope you guys enjoy it. Me and Patrick were able to come together and shoot a couple more videos for you guys. This one is all about serving as a ministerial servant and as an elder. And then we shot another video that's all about dating and marriage within the witnesses. That'll be dropping soon. That's a really good one. Now, both of these videos are a little bit more open-ended and free-flowing, more conversational style, but still very much focused on the topic. I thought it would be interesting and insightful to have both a former elder and a former ministerial servant on the same video talking openly about these subjects in a way that we would not even dream of doing as Jehovah's Witnesses. These videos are a little bit longer than my typical videos, but out of respect for your time, I've added timestamps in the description, so you can go through and pick the subject that interests you the most and check out that part. So without further ado, let's get into the interview. You were an elder for how long?
A little over 3.5 years or so.
And then before that, how long were you a ministerial servant?
I served for about 4 years.
Yeah, that was the same thing for me. I was about 4 years, with the last year being fully awake, so that was very interesting. So what was the biggest challenge of serving as let's start with the elder.
Oof, though, that was definitely a lot of pressure, and especially with whatever age you are when you're appointed as one. Me, I was relatively young, about 26 when I was appointed. So not just all of the extra assignments at the hall, but a lot of it is just what you do outside of the hall. All the stuff, the extra meetings, things from shepherding calls to, you name it. There's just this whole extra layer that's now put on top of you. Because when you're a servant, as you can attest to, you have that added pressure, and you get that spotlight, and then now it's just that much more of a multiplier put on top of you.
Yeah. How about as a servant?
That's kind of your introduction to seeing the things that go on behind closed doors, so to speak. You start to see a side of the congregation that you really didn't know existed. And then someone illustrated it to me this way, which always stuck with me. They said, imagine the congregation, it's like a boat or a ship. And the congregation's on the top deck, and they're partying and having a great time, enjoying the ride. And then when you go down and, maybe let's say the kitchen, right? That's where the servants are. They're preparing the food, they're working, they're assisting. And then you go down one more layer, and now you're in like the bottom of the ship. And the elders are down there, and they're bailing the water out of the ship. And here, nobody knows this as far as what's going on. That's kind of a good illustration to say, you're so naive when you're just a publisher in the congregation. You have no idea what's really going on and what people and families are going through. And so then when you become a servant, you're just getting introduced to now this whole world, this whole, backside of the congregation that you would never know otherwise.
In my case, when I was a servant, like you said, the spotlight is really on you. As immediately, as soon as they said that announcement, it was like all eyes on me. Everything I did, everything I said, all my actions were now being, examined under a microscope. And, and especially like even just participating in the meetings, your answers have to be spot on. When you go out in service, you better have your presentation exactly right, because they're holding you to a much higher standard now.
Yeah, it's so much tighter, and you're just that walking on eggshells feeling.
Yes,
gets so much worse. And when you're a publisher, you might be kind of loose. Maybe there's a TV show or movie or something, or you make a comment about something. It's just not taken as seriously. It's not given as much weight. But now you're an appointed man. Yes. Oh, he said what? Like, did you hear how he said this or how he phrased it? And yeah, it's just. You just want to pull your hair out sometimes, it's just, it gets too much. And but I don't know, you learn to just kind of adapt and go with it, but that stress really does take its toll over time.
It sure does, yeah. Going to the beginning of it, was there anything interesting that came up during your appointment meeting?
The questions are really based more on to protect the organization more than anything. Because one of the first things they ask you is, have you ever been guilty of, child molestation, essentially? And they ask you that, and you're kind of, because I was only 22 at the time, and I remember even the CO was kind of just like, well, it's something that we have to ask. I'm 22, right? But they still have to do it. So they ask you that, and then they also ask you if there's anything that could hold up your appointment. So it's kind of this broad term, whether it's pornography or maybe it's, I don't know, some kind of sin in some way that could hold you from being appointed. So it's just this open-ended kind of thing, like, again, it's to protect them more than anything for the appointment.
Yeah, same experience on my end. And funny enough, I was 22 as well. So yeah. When I got appointed, and when the circuit overseer asked me that question about the child abuse question, I feel so bad about it now, but I actually laughed because I thought that was such a thing that doesn't exist within the witness organization. Mm-hmm. So I was like, why would he ask me something like this? And then when I woke up, it was like, oh, okay, this is an ongoing issue, and they just want to make sure that they're not appointing anybody that's, been known to do this and, ruin their reputation even further. So, that goes, very interesting.
Yeah, that goes along with that illustration too. Because you're so naive when you're a publisher, and no idea what's going on, and so then, like you said, a question like that, it's just like, what? What are you talking about? Child molestation? Like really?
Yeah.
But yeah, when you get to see this is a humongous issue, that you see why that it's a necessary thing to ask at that point.
Very much so. When you became an elder, were you surprised when you received the elder's book?
I was aware of the book just because my dad was an elder, and so I knew of it. Mm-hmm. And like anything, you're always kind of curious to see, well, what's in it. It's like it's a special book that no one has really access to. And I remember like seeing it in his bag, and I remember kind of pulling it out, just like kind of thumbing through it, but I didn't spend much time. I felt so guilty. I just put it back, and like Jehovah's going to strike me down reading this book or something, and so I put it back in his bag. And so I was aware of the book, and so when I was appointed, you get your own copy, you get your own hard copy, and the one that we got was, they called it the KS10, and so in that book there were so many modifications to it, just from the time they published that. It was only maybe 5-6 years old, I believe, something around those lines. They had already modified it so much to where when you get it, I was also given this sheet that's like, go to this page, this paragraph, cross off this paragraph, and write in a certain letter, like see September 14th, 2015 letter on this. And again, that's that update, that's the modification. So there's so many modifications, they ended up releasing a new book. Wow. And then that new book was kind of what we primarily studied out of from there. When you're looking at the updates and all the policy changes, and you really get to see the whole scope, the whole broad scope of everything. And that's where the elder school comes into play too. So once you're appointed, they send you to this week-long school where basically you're going over the policies. It's around the summertime, around where the pioneer schools are, and you're kind of just going through all the policies and all the procedures of what that book contains and how to best implement it. Really, when you're an elder, you feel more like a company foreman than anything. You have this policy book, and you're just being told, the best way to be an elder is to follow this book to a T. That's why before any judicial committee, you had to reread the chapters on that over and over again. Like every time you're on a committee, you have to read those over so that you're going through them exactly how the society wants you to go through it. And of course, there were things that were in the school, such as with that child abuse topic, if that ever came up, again, our instructors, they taught us this phrase. It was 1-800-CTB is what they used. And CTB stood for call the branch. So if there's ever a question on anything that you're confused on, and especially with the abuse cases, 1-800-CTB, call the branch. And that was always the first call that we made, any kind of allegation or accusation, boom. It's like immediately, the book even says immediately call the branch on what to do. So you call them up, and us being from Washington State, you would say, speak to the Washington desk. Yeah. And so each state had kind of their own representative, so that those brothers were more versed in maybe the laws, if there was a particular law in a certain state, and they advise you what to do. But again, you're as an elder, you tell the parents or whoever it was, you're always free to go to the police. We're not going to stop you to go to the police. But again, as we know, the culture, you're heavily discouraged from doing that because you're going to bring reproach on Jehovah's name. And it's like, yeah, you have every right to go to the police. Like, we're not going to stop you. But in the background, it's kind of like you have to think about that. Are you going to bring reproach on the organization and bring reproach on Jehovah's name? So it's this weird, like, push and pull kind of feeling behind that. We've talked to about how Pharisaic it was and how rule-oriented it was. And now looking back, you can see it's like a Pharisaic policy almost. You just have these rules that so many of them, they're not scripturally based. They're just arbitrary. They're completely arbitrary rules that God's organization comes up with. And now you have to enforce as an elder, just to make sure that you always have Jehovah's blessing, and it's always put in that way. The closer you follow this book, the more Jehovah can work with your congregation and work with the brothers and so on and so forth.
So, as an elder, and you don't have to go into details, but were you ever on a judicial committee?
Yeah, I was on a few. I was on a few judicial committees, and the whole process of that is, again, you're never really ready for it, especially the first one that you go on, and you're just basically taking down a bunch of notes. You're taking down, all the things they say, and again, the shepherding book guides you as far as like how to conduct this meeting. What sort of questions should you ask? What sort of answers are you looking for? So because the biggest thing with the Judicial Committee, and you sitting there across the table, you and two other brothers, is you're trying to determine repentance. That's the whole thing. So the things that they're saying after you ask them, like, are they making excuses, or are they trying to, those are all signs of someone that's not repentant. Were they caught, or did they come forward? And the big thing that we would look for as elders was, do they feel regret for bringing reproach on Jehovah's name? And that was kind of like the number one thing. If someone said that was a big plus to us, because it was almost like a checklist. Like, oh, yeah, they said, that they didn't want to bring reproach in Jehovah's name. And it would just go through things like, tears don't necessarily mean someone's repentant. It could be crying. It doesn't really mean that. Or maybe even a lack of tears. So they touch on things like that. But so anyone especially that might be going through a judicial committee meeting, the book's available. And those are some of the things that they look for. There's key phrases and there's key words such as that. But the whole point is, are you making excuses, or are you expressing regret for, again, Jehovah's organization, Jehovah's name? So that way, if you're sorry about those things, you're more likely to, get a reproof instead of a disfellowshipping. But it's definitely a strange process, having the Judicial Committee meeting and just sitting there, as a judge. And again, how can you sit there and really know what somebody's heart condition is like? I look back to that now, and it's like we didn't know. All we're doing is just following what this book says and going along with it. Even in my own judicial committee, once I was on the other side of the table, and when I was disfellowshipped, I could tell, they're just following the book. That's all it is. So, I mean, I can't be, I'm not angry at the brothers or anything, because I know that that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
And at certain times, I know we as a committee would have, I guess, have a crisis of conscience of sorts, where you feel in your heart, maybe this person can, just get reproof, but maybe it was their third time, and they got reproved every single time. Well, there's direction in the book for that. That if it's the third time, well, then maybe more action should be taken. So even though we felt reproof would be good, it's like the book would override that, and it would say, this is what you should be doing instead. So just recognize that elders that is all you are trained. You follow that book as close as you can, and that's what's going to make you the best elder possible.
Wow. So was there ever a time when you guys disagreed?
Yeah, there's definitely times when not everyone's in agreement. But that then the concept of being yielding comes into place. So yielding is something that you're kind of admonished to be. If you have two people that are in agreement and then maybe you disagree and you're talking about it, and if something can't be shown scripturally, like they say, to really overturn what their thinking is, then you're supposed to be the yielding one and then kind of acquiesce to what their thinking is. And it's kind of like that way you have Jehovah's Spirit on it. But when you think about it, if it's really Jehovah's Spirit that's directing you three to make this decision, then why is there a disagreement in the first place? And these are some of the questions that you don't think about until after you're out. The same goes with appointments too. And all appointments are, I mean, for anyone that's wondering, is you could have, I know there was times too when we would sit in our meetings Friday with the circuit overseer, and we would all want this one brother to be a servant. He's doing great, he's doing this and that, we all agree. And the circuit overseer could just veto it and overturn the whole thing, because maybe there was a couple things from that he knows or whatever the case may have been. But there's lots of disagreements amongst elders, whether it's in a committee meeting or even just an elders meeting too. But you're supposed to be yielding. You have to just, don't stand strong, go with the majority. That way you have unity. Even though it's not really true unity, you're just giving up to the majority's thinking is all it is.
So interesting on a couple of points. The main one is that that kind of aligns to what I read in Crisis of Conscience. What goes on at the very top level, we see a lot of yielding even at the governing body level, where you have members who really don't agree with a certain teaching, and yet they have to yield to the majority, and then that now becomes law for the whole Jehovah's Witness organization. So even though the top leaders didn't fully agree on it.
Yep, the governing body, they don't agree. Because again, all we're taught is what? Jehovah's leading men. He's leading these men. So you just have to ask yourself, then why is there so much disagreement? Why are we told to be yielding if really the Spirit is supposed to be directing things?
So here's another question for you on that same topic. And again, you don't have to go into details, but do the elders ever dig into deeper issues? Like, so for example, say a person has an issue with alcohol, right? And say they've been in Judicial Committee for a couple times for that same issue. Do the elders ever consider, like, hey, does this person have an alcohol issue in their family, or addiction issues? What's going on in their life that they may be triggered to go into that addiction? Do they ever dig in deep into that, or is it just surface level, like the Bible says this, you disobeyed, you're done?
There's a huge gray area, like you said, in an issue like alcoholism or a lot of things for that matter. You have this huge gray area, but basically you're trying to find black and white answers in a gray filled area. And so to answer your question, I think that kind of depends on the elder themselves. Maybe the elder knows that person personally, and so they naturally have more compassion and sympathy, and maybe they knew about their issues, they knew about their histories more. But what I can say is you're really viewed more with a spirit of judgment more than a spirit of compassion, especially once it gets to the judicial level. They might be able to do a shepherding visit and try to find out, but again, they're looking for something that, he said this, then as a body you have to meet to see if judicial action is warranted. That's a whole other section in the book where, the person admitted to this, or they talked about this. Should a judicial committee be formed, basically? So again, like you said, someone comes up with a problem like with alcohol, and they need help. The elders are really thinking, does a judicial committee need to be formed? More than do they, how do we actually help this person, like through rehab? They're more concerned again with keeping the congregation clean. And that's their primary thing. And so then once you get to the judicial committee meeting, you might have some elders that get really in depth. You have some that are maybe really strict. They're not so lenient. That kind of varies up and down. But that's what I could say in my case with my judicial committee meeting. I came forward with a problem, with that pornography problem I had for years, and I was trying to get help. I was in an incredibly vulnerable state, and that's the feeling I got. Is it wasn't from a spirit of understanding. It was from a spirit of judgment.
The reason I asked that is because I remember when I was in, they would often equate elders as counselors. And in real life, if you have a counselor and you go to them with an issue like that, their first thing that they want to do is figure out where's this issue coming from.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what is triggering you? What is making you go down that path in the first place? It's not from a place of, oh, that's bad. It's, okay, why? You know, what's leading you here to begin with?
It's just very Pharisaic when you look back on it, because there's so much judgment that you have as a witness towards another person. And you sit there at this table and you're supposed to know this person's heart condition by things that they say. And it's just, you know, it's like you look back and kind of just shudder that this is what I used to do. But, you know, it's nice to now be able to reflect on that, and hopefully, you know, people that are maybe going through the same situation, if there is any elders watching this, and maybe they have that guilt, because you have to take action, and whether it's disfellowshipping or not, and it's a burden on you. It's a big decision, and there's a lot of sleepless nights that elders go through. I know that there were some that, you know, alcohol is a big thing too with the witnesses, as we know.
Yeah.
You cope with it in very unhealthy ways, this incredibly stressful environment that you're in, and it's hard on the elders too. I know elders do get, you know, really bad rap for, and some are, you know, are really bad, nasty elders as well, and it's very sad that they're in congregation. But some are good, and I've worked with some that really did care. But again, it's overshadowed by this book that you have to follow if you want to be the best elder that you can be. So just understand that they're coming from a place where, you know, you're this enforcer, you're this foreman, to make sure that what the policies have already been written, they're just simply carrying out that stuff.
So how did meetings change for you when you became an elder, for example?
I'd say it was not just like when you become a servant, you're given these meeting parts and you're giving more responsibility, I'd say, within the congregation in that way. Mm-hmm. Now your responsibilities expand outside the congregation. It's not just the times that you're at the meeting. It is in a way with the different types of meeting parts. You might be given, you know, maybe a marketing talk. You may be given, you know, heavier topics to talk about, or local needs part. But now your responsibilities expand so much more outside the congregation. You may even have, there was times too when people, right when the meeting was starting, they would come up to us, or one of us, and say, I got to talk to you guys about a problem. Mm-hmm. And so right there, you just, okay, and you'd grab another brother and you'd go in the back and talk about something, or maybe right after the meeting you had, you know, a meeting, and you had to meet on a certain topic, and mm-hmm. something came up with someone, and now again you go through this whole process. You know, do they need just counsel? Is this a committee, judicial committee matter? Whatever the case may be. So it's just this whole cycle of responsibilities and duties and all these hats that you gotta wear and you gotta swap out from time to time. You know.
How about when you, as a servant, how the meetings changed for you?
That was like your introduction, I would say, to, again, like you start to get to see what really goes on. You just experience the congregation in a whole new way. Meetings are totally different. Mm-hmm. You don't just get to sit down and enjoy it. And mm-hmm. I remember just seeing people, and I would just envy them so much that I wish I could just go to the meeting and just sit down and just listen. Not getting grabbed for mics, not getting grabbed for sound, or, oh, I got a part tonight, and mm-hmm. just have one night where you can just be totally free and just not have any responsibility. So I'd say, you know, with being a servant, that really changes, you know, your view of meetings, and, you know, you have so much more participation in them now. And like we talked about earlier, the pressure, mm-hmm. your comments during meeting and outside, how you dress, all of that is just so much more highlighted now that you're appointed.
Yeah, and your time. Being a witness, you have 2 meetings a week. You got mm-hmm. service that you need to go out on. You have, you know, your personal study night or your family study night. You have the daily text every morning. So I mean, just in a typical 7-day period, you may have a day or two to actually have to yourself. You know. Mm-hmm. Other than that, you're doing something. You're studying something. You're going to meetings. You're doing something for the watchtower. Mm-hmm. And as soon as you become a servant, it's even more so. Even more preparation, even more study, even more talks you have to give. They say it's a privilege, but in actuality, it does become a little bit of a stressor, because you just don't have any me time. Even when you are trying to relax, in the back of your mind, at least for me, I'm trying to figure out, how to write this next talk,
Right.
while I'm trying to relax. So yeah,
it's always going nonstop.
Speaking of which, what was your experience with writing public talks?
Public talks, you prepare them in a different way than you would just like your 5-minute talks in the school.
Mm-hmm.
So you're given an outline that you had all the outlines available that you could print off. And what's funny about those outlines is that sometimes they'd be from maybe early mid-90s, maybe from the 80s, and so they update them, but sometimes they didn't get updated. So you're given this outline, you have all these little references to watchtowers, but then you had to do extra to find the most up-to-date teaching, even on an outline. Yeah. So you may have had, this is the point, you need to cover, here's the reference, but make sure that you see with the updated information, because it could have changed. And so you really had to dive into all that reference material. And again, there's no real outside sources. They always discouraged you from using those outside sources. Stick as close as you can to the outline. Use those materials.
The outline surprised me a lot, because before I was a ministerial servant, I didn't really know how public talks were structured. Mm-hmm. I kind of thought that I don't know why I thought this, but for some reason I thought that they just give you a topic and you just run with it. Mm-hmm. And that is not the case at all. Those public talks they're structured so much, down to a T. And if you go off too much after the talk is over, guess where you're going to be? In the back room talking to an elder about how you went off course. So, but yeah, that surprised me a lot, just how structured they were. I didn't have the freedom that I thought I would have had. And in some cases, I feel like I had almost a little bit more freedom with the 5-minute school talks than I did with the public talks. So.
Yeah. And then, but what's funny is then they would say, well, just make sure you make it your own. But follow this outline, but make it your own. Yeah. And how am I supposed to do that,
So, as either an elder or a servant, probably more so elder, did you ever feel burned out?
Oh, yeah. And what's interesting about that is it's kind of like the analogy we've all heard about the frog in the pot of water, and then instead of throwing it in boiling water, you just turn up the heat more and more. We've heard that before. Mm-hmm. Very similar to how I felt. You just slowly over the years, you just kind of take on a little bit more every single time. And then you're able to find a little bit of opening in your schedule. Oh yeah, I can do this, I can do that. And you're always pressured to. We know the Watchtower and the talks have been, you have too much free time, or you're unbalanced, because they want to keep you busy. They want to keep you always moving upwards. And it wasn't until I was already service overseer and Tacoma Harbor Ministry overseer and just doing stuff for Metro. I honestly, I can't even remember just the stuff. And it gets to a point where your mind can only do so much and your emotions can only do so much, and then your body starts reacting in ways that you're like, well, why am I losing sleep? Why am I, I'm losing weight? What's, my hair is turning gray. It's like there's these factors that your body starts reacting because you just put up with it. You adapt, and you're asking for Jehovah's blessing, help me with this. But and looking back, I could have said no, but at the same time, you're kind of encouraged not to. It's like if you have the capabilities and circumstances, we need brothers, we need them to help, and what a great thing, and you'll get Jehovah's blessing if you take on more assignments. Mm-hmm. Not thinking about your mental health in that state, you're just being told, don't worry, Jehovah's going to bless you, he's going to work things out. And it got to a point with me that I remember meeting, after I got married, meeting with a brother, and I'm like, I just can't, I have to get rid of this, it's too much. Mm-hmm. And he understood, but it's sad that it got to that point, that they'll just use you, and as much as you want, they'll just put on responsibilities. All you have to do is say yes.
And you don't feel like you can say no, honestly. And especially in that environment where there's so much guilt and shame just ingrained into that culture, you'll feel guilty. You'll feel shame if you say no. You know, and then you also have the other layer of you're constantly comparing yourselves to others. At every convention or assembly, they're constantly bringing people on stage to say, "Hey, look at this person."
Like, why are there people even on stage? You know, they say, well, it's to encourage you because look, here's a couple that did this and that, but then you have the scripture about comparing yourself, not comparing yourself to one another. And it's so weird when you see that. Like, that's exactly what you're doing.
Yeah.
Be like them. Be like these people.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. How can you say don't compare yourselves to others when they literally say, here's this example. Can you do anything in your life to...
Yeah. The question that
gets... every single time. And it's like, dang, can I? I mean, I was... Literally the year before I woke up, I was literally getting ready to try to cut my job down to part-time, sell off the car that I had just bought, and just completely collapse my life in order to try to pioneer on top of being a servant, on top of working. And some people can do it, but honestly, that life is not made for everybody. And they make it like it's a one shoe fits all. If you're a witness, you should be able to pioneer. You should be able to do this. So that's not for everybody. It's really not. But you don't have the freedom to say it's not for you.
Exactly. And it's so unfair because, like you said, you do get that one person that is working full time and maybe they have kids and they're pioneering. And then that one person gets used as an example everywhere. Well, it's like they're doing it. Like, it's kind of like maybe you can rethink your situation because they're doing it. The constant comparison, constant judgment. Yeah, it's so toxic.
What would you say as advice for a ministerial servant or an elder who's currently PIMO or trying to wake up? What advice would you have for them?
Well, first of all, just know there is a lot of us out there that that can understand things. You may feel isolated. You may feel that no one can really know what I'm going through, and that may be the case with someone's individual circumstances. But there is a support group out there. Things like subreddits. There's even subreddits for elder servants as well. But just know this too, that again, with that whole thinking, that whole mindset that if this is God's organization and He's using people and He's directing them in decisions, then why is there so many changes? Why is there so many updates that happen year after year? Even recently with what they said about people, in their early 20s being appointed elder. I could never imagine. I was 26 and I felt like a baby being, just in this group of men that were, in their at least 40s, 50s plus. And I felt way too young then. I can't imagine what it would be like being an elder in your early 20s. But again, it's changes like that it's like you have to ask, is this really something that a God is directing people to, or is it just man-made? Are they just figuring things out along as they go? Anyone that's an elder that's watching this knows all the letters that come in. They know all the changes and all the updates, and you're being told, make sure that you're always up to date on that stuff. And if these things were so important, then why didn't Jehovah, why didn't God reveal these things in the first place? Why did it take this long to get there? So just ask yourself that, and just know that what you're going through, the stresses that you feel, really take that time for yourself. Your mental health is so important, and don't let it get to a point where now you're frozen or you have a breakdown, or even turn to unhealthy habits with alcoholism being so prevalent as witnesses. Please just make sure that you're caring for yourself, you're caring for your family, and don't let this organization use you and squeeze every drop out of you, because they will if you let them.
As Patrick said, your mental health is very important. I'm not sure why mental health is not put as a higher priority within the witness organization, but it really does need to be. I mean, I know for me, having that title of servant just made it that much harder to leave, because that becomes part of your identity in a way. I mean, you're already having to leave the identity of being a witness. Now you're also having to leave the identity of being a ministerial servant or being an elder. Whatever you think of as yourself. Back then I thought of myself as Justin, the Jehovah's Witness, who is also a ministerial servant, who is also worked as an architectural designer and all these things. And through having to leave that job, leaving that position, the ministerial servant position, all those things, all of those layers of my identity had to go away. And when you go through such an ego dissolvement like that, it is heavy. And it is going to be something that you have to take your time with. And, in my case, it took me a year to get out. Maybe for some of you, it might take you a couple of years. Maybe it might only take you a couple of months. Just depends on the person. But you got to figure out what's right for you and concentrate on your mental health for sure.
Yeah, and just to add to that, it may take getting a mental health professional. I was somebody that never thought I needed one. I never thought that, there's like a taboo with having a counselor, mental health professional, but that's not the case. He was very helpful in giving me the healthy way to think about things. One thing I remember he said was, and he was a very good counselor, very neutral, did not try to sway me against my beliefs or anything like that. But one comment that stuck with me was, he said, just beware of anybody or a group or anything that says, I have all truth. I have all knowledge about something. And that alone should just be that red flag. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing it. We're seeing the evidence. Do they really have that? How many? If you're changing your policies so often, then obviously it means that you didn't. You didn't have that in the first place. And so just, like Justin said, your mental health, take care of that, and be well. Just know that it's going to take time. Do that outside research. If it's truth, it should stand on its own. Doesn't matter what information you're able to see. But yeah, please take care of yourself.
Hopefully you guys enjoyed that interview. A lot of great points in there. And like I said, we have another one coming out that's about dating and marriage. So stay tuned for that one, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.